Welcome to The Gig. I'm Johnny O, and today we're talking about motherboards and chipsets. Okay, so there's basically two CPUs. There's only two CPUs that matter. That's AMD and Intel. And high-end PCs, it's Intel and AMD. And their chipsets are just as important as the CPUs. Now, for Intel, you have X299 class chipsets, and for AMD's Ryzen, you have X399 chipsets. They basically do the same thing, but one does it for Intel chips and the other does it for AMD chips. The other thing I want to say, and I have to mention, is if you're a Mac user, don't worry, just turn this off. It has nothing to do with you. Mac will choose whatever you want or whatever they want and just sell it to you for massive amounts of money. So it doesn't matter. Chipsets don't matter to you. Motherboards don't matter either. They just give you whatever they want to give you. Okay, so with that out of the way, this also has nothing to do with console noobs, so forget console noobs. Number one, X299 and X399 chips on motherboards basically do the same thing. Now, what you have is you have 8 lanes, PCIe, you can have 128 gigs of memory, and USB 3.1. You'll probably have maybe Thunderbolt or something too, but it will have multiple USB 3.1s. It will also have up to 12 SATA drives. It'll fit 12 or 16 SATA drives. Also, it'll fit anywhere from 2 to 4 M2 SSD drives. Very important. You have to understand the M2 bus. Now, the M2 bus is an SSD bus, but it runs on the PCIe bus lane. Now, PCIe is the fastest port on the computer next to the memory and the CPU. Now, what PCIe is, the fastest bus. You can have up to 8 full PCIe devices running at full bus speed on any one of these motherboards, either X299 or X399 motherboards. Now, on a cheaper motherboard, you might only have 2 PCIe buses with 16 lanes. What 16 lanes means is 16 giga transfers per second. Now, back in the day, we only had AGP or PCIe, or PCI, and that's where PCIe comes from PCI. Everything's PCIe now. 8 giga transfers per second means that if you have one video card, it runs on a PCIe lane, and it has 16 lanes per bus. 8 lanes per bus, and 8 lanes in total on a motherboard. That's the maximum you can have, is 8 full speed lanes. 16 giga transfers per second per lane. That's the deal. Wait, no, I have that wrong. Excuse me, no. It's 8 PCIe lanes running at 16 times 8, no. 16 giga transfers per lane per motherboard. And the big motherboards will have 8 lanes. 6 lanes if you got a cheap one, it might have 4. If you get a little cheaper, maybe only 2 if you have a cheaper motherboard. So, when you get a motherboard, and you want to run 2 video cards, you got to make sure that it has at least 2 full PCIe lanes. Now, they take one of these lanes, or 2 of these lanes, and they break it off for M2 SSD drives. So, you can only have up to 6 PCIe slots, and then there'll be 2 or 4 M2 slots. Now, what those M2 slots do is they allow you to boot off of an M2 SSD, which looks like a little stick of gum. It's long and it will have chips along it. It's a smaller SSD than your SATA SSDs, but it's much faster because it runs at full clock speed over your PCIe lane, and it's called an M2, M.2. So what happens is your computer, like the one I have here, this laptop boots in less than 10 seconds. That's because it's running on an M2 SSD. If you're gonna get a motherboard, you always get the best possible motherboard you can get. I know there's cheap motherboards and you might not wanna use the system as your main system, so you'll get a cheaper system. That's the only reason to do that. For example, a cheaper system would be something that you're gonna buy a cheaper motherboard, you're not gonna use it for graphics, you're gonna use the onboard sound, and you're gonna put a lot of hard drives in it. And you're just going to place it on your network somewhere, and you're going to access files and media from that. That would be why you would buy a cheaper motherboard. You don't buy a cheaper motherboard for your main computer. Your main computer must have a good motherboard. A Gigabyte, an Asus, an Acer, these are all great brands. But in my opinion, the #1 brand for motherboards is Asus. I've been using Asus since the 90s, since they came out in 95, 96, and I've never had a problem with any one of them. One time I did have a problem with a reseller, a retailer. He wouldn't take a motherboard back, although it was defective. Asus, I contacted Asus. Asus took back that motherboard directly because the reseller wouldn't, for whatever reason. Anyways, they're a really great company. They make the best motherboard. So if you're going to buy a really good computer, you get an Asus. Asus is like the Rolls-Royce of motherboards. Okay, moving right along. The fastest bus is between the memory and the CPU. Now, you don't have to really worry about the bus speed, but you do have to take a look at these higher-end motherboards, how much RAM they will support. And I believe it used to be up to the operating system, but now it's more or less up to the motherboard manufacturer, because the operating system just allows massive amounts of RAM. I think Windows 10 allows something like 256 gigs or 128 gigs, something insane. I believe it's only 128. So your motherboard will have 8 slots, and it will be able to address 128 gigs of RAM. You don't have to worry about that bus. The second thing you got to look at in your motherboard, you look at your M2 slots. Some of these newer boards they'll have up to 4 M2 slots. Then you look at your SATA slots. How many SATA slots? I think they'll take up to 16 SATA 2 hard drives, which is insane. Then you look at your #3. You look at how many USB 3.1 ports it will have. But you do want, you have these cheaper sets. You have like X379 or X279 I've read about them. And don't get those. Those are just bastardized versions of the X299 and X399. You want to get the high-end chipsets. All they've done is they've just stripped components from it to make it cheaper. Also on cheaper motherboards, you also get cheaper capacitors and registers and resistors. Okay? I've had motherboards run for up to 12 years straight. When I buy a machine, I leave it on. Instead of turning off the machine when I walk away and I go to work, I actually just turn off the monitor. I leave the machine running 24/7 for year after year after year. And that's the optimal running temperature for those big high-end motherboards. They have to be on all the time. If they're on all the time, then you don't have any parts moving. They're heating up and they're cooling down every day for years. That will wear out your motherboard. Either leave it off completely or leave it on completely. And obviously you want to leave it on because you're going to be using it. Leave your computer on 24/7. I've done this up until I think 2007, 2008. I had a computer, a Pentium 120, running from 1995, 96 up to 2007. That's how long it was running because I left it on all the time. I cleaned it once every couple months and left it on. So when you buy a machine or you build a machine of your own, make sure the motherboard is one of the best components you buy. You don't have to buy the fastest CPU, you don't have to buy the most memory, and you don't have to buy the best video card. But one thing you do have to buy is the best motherboard. And in my opinion, Asus X299 and X399 are the best motherboards. That's what I would buy right now if I was going to build a machine. I'm Johnny O, and this has been The Gig. Subscriptions down below, arguments down below, questions, comments. I'll get to your questions, I'll get to your comments if I like them. If I don't, forget it. I'll just ignore you.